Hello and welcome to this edition of Defacto Review, a weekly roundup of the biggest stories shaping Mongolia. Here with us tonight is guest commentator and analyst Mogi Badrobanta. Hi, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
We're live on Facebook, so check us out on Facebook at VTelevision. We want to hear your thoughts, so send comments on Twitter with hashtag #Jargle_Defacto. Okay, let's get with it. This week on the program. Mongolia is set to ramp up renewable energy capacity as it targets goals for Paris Agreement. Shares of the state-owned Talvintal gold mine on the books for public disbursement. UB bans cheap and dirty coal to combat choking smog. And finally, fitness centers partner for discounts to UB residents. Okay, let's kick off our program this evening with a story about climate change and the global community. Mongolia is gearing up to expand its renewable energy capacity to 20% over the next 2 years as lawmakers look at policies to meet its targets from the Paris Agreement for global climate change. Mongolia is one of 175 partners with the UN Convention on Climate Change to agree to meet a series of targets that deal with greenhouse gas emissions mitigation, adaptation, and finance beginning from 2020. In addition to renewable energy, Mongolia is aiming to reduce electricity losses to about 10% and heat losses in buildings by about 20%. Mongolia's coal-fired heat and power plants will be made more efficient in addition to the introduction of advanced technologies such as supercritical pressure coal combustion, News.mn reported. Okay, Mogi, so getting with it real quick, Mongolia is already a country with a small population, which generally leaves a smaller carbon footprint. So what should Mongolia's main focus be on to reduce that footprint?
Well, the biggest problem facing Mongolia in terms of climate change is desertification.
Yes.
Almost two-thirds of the country is a desert or on the brink of becoming a desert. So
what's the cause of that?
Climate change, number one. The average temperature rise is the highest in Mongolia among all the countries in the world. So obviously Mongolia is becoming a warmer country year by year. This affects obviously the climate, making it even more drier.
I believe it's 2 centigrade higher in temperature compared to the 1970s.
Right. And the second reason for the desertification is obviously too many goats. We've had rising number of goats because cashmere is one of the biggest exports of Mongolia. So these are the things that are affecting desertification. But
so why specifically goats? Why is that a concern?
Well, goats, when they graze, they dig the root of the grass. So meaning that once a goat passes through a grass field, it never grows back.
So they're chomping down and they get all the way down, so there's nothing to come back for the next season.
Right. So that's that's why goats are very detrimental to the environment.
Yeah. There have been some experts that have been watching to say that perhaps the goat population could be mitigated with a healthier portfolio or my diverse grouping of animals.
Sure. If we make Mongolia is the second largest producer of cashmere, raw cashmere.
Yeah.
And
some estimates say 40% of the world.
It is. And because most of the cashmere that's exported is raw, mostly to China. China buys a lot of raw cashmere from Mongolia and then mixes it with their own and then produces finer threads and final products. So if Mongolian-owned domestic producers, the final producers, buy more and then improve the quality of the goats in terms of cashmere production, so that needs to be addressed sooner or later. We can't have herders determining themselves how many goats they have, and then plus the government gives subsidies to herders who, for every kilogram of cashmere wool produced. So and perhaps that needs to stop as well, and then maybe introduce a tax on herd livestock.
So are herders actually taxed on the livestock under current conditions?
No, they're not at all. In fact, they're even subsidized for being herders for producing cashmere and wool.
So no incentive to manage
No,
your
yeah,
numbers.
exactly. So no incentive to decrease their number of livestock to improve the quality of their livestock. Yeah.
And it's also worth mentioning these exploding numbers also contribute to the more frequency of the so-called Zud, which is a terrible winter disaster that leads to many animal deaths and really hurts the most vulnerable herders in Mongolia.
Right. Mongolia is the least populated population density country in the world, but still the number of livestock is unsustainable. The capacity for grazing lands is already exceeded. So that number of livestock does need to be controlled, and the government needs to step in on this.
Yeah. So looking at the lawmakers' perspective, even if they're able to get the right legislation in place, what frustrations do you see for the actual implementation of these policies?
Well, as you said, we have a goal of having 20% of our energy production coming from renewable energy by 2020, 30% by 2030. At the moment, we are producing roughly a little over 8% from renewable energy. It was the biggest problem building and financing this kind of projects is the assurance of the government being able to buy whatever electricity they produce.
Yeah.
So by law, any kind of renewable energy that's built in Mongolia, the government has the obligation to buy it, no matter the price, even if it's higher than, say, from the coal power plants. The first wind park, Selkit, Newcom, and EBRD, and these kind of companies who invested in it, they had a problem selling it to the government at first.
Okay.
So
when it first
that's
launched.
why when they first launched. It finally, I think it fixed itself, and the government is buying it, which made it more, gave assurance to other wind park projects to be able to attract investment. So
last year, also the NG released a new wind park.
Right, that's the Saishan wind park, if I believe correctly. And Newcom is building a second wind park in South Gobi. And there's a solar power plant in operation in Dakhang.
Already?
Yeah, it's already in operation. So, so there's a couple of more renewable energy projects in the pipeline. So the government needs to start buying it for if you want to meet the 2020 and 2030 goals. So that's the biggest risk in the renewable energy projects in Mongolia. And
so what do you think can be Mongolia's long-lasting impact for this region, Northern Asia?
Well, as you said, Mongolia has a very small population. It doesn't need a lot of money, well, relatively, it doesn't need a lot of money to meet its Paris goals. And perhaps Mongolia could become a role model in terms of how renewable, how green our economy becomes. Mongolia is part of the Asian Supergrid project as well. So if these current projects are viable and become very profitable, it makes it even better for Mongolia to start building more, and then we can become a net exporter of electricity and start supplying the entire East Asian economies with renewable energy.
Clean energy,
yes.
Yeah. And that's a big plan that'll take a lot of years of course, connecting and making agreements.
Yeah, well, the pipeline is there. Maybe perhaps if South Gobi region has excess of electricity under the Asian Supergrid, which China is a part of, we can export electricity to China, and then China can export it to Japan and South Korea. So that's the idea of the Asian Supergrid. Mongolia is not going to supply Japan directly. We're going to become one grid, so to speak. East Asia, entirely South Korea, Japan, and China, and Mongolia.
And in recent years, there's been a lot of talk about carbon credit trade. Can Mongolia get in on that somehow?
Well, Mongolia, in fact, got its first financing carbon credit from a project. So Japan has a joint credit mechanism, if I remember the name correctly. So
something to that effect, yeah.
Yeah. So Japan obviously has its own obligations to climate change, to reducing its carbon emissions. So so it's implementing the first project, if I believe correctly, last year got its first money from Japan under the joint carbon credit mechanism. So
yeah.
So it's been proven.
And this is incentive for Japan to invest in Mongolia's renewables?
Of course. Well, Japan is already a big investor in renewable energy. So
sure.
Selkit Newcom has a joint venture with Japanese big corporation SoftBank. And SoftBank was the initiator of the whole Asian supergrid idea. So a Japanese big company is already a joint venture partner with Mongolian company to build more wind parks.
Okay, we're going to go from renewable resources to mineral resources. The state-owned unit for the Talvintulga coking coal mine this week put in motion new efforts to deliver Mongolian citizens the 1,072 shares of the company that were promised but have so long been delayed by issues that including financial troubles plaguing the mine. The company's board of directors on Thursday ordered management to record the transaction into its financial accounts as well as its shares with the Financial Regulatory Commission and Mongolia Stock Exchange. The shareholders' meeting is scheduled for 6 months from now, where stakeholders will discuss the issues related to the equity release. Meanwhile, the Minister of Mining, Sumibazar Dolgosren, has pushed for returned efforts to list the company on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Waiting any longer, he warned, would put the actions needed too close to the elections in 2020. Okay, so looking at the past for getting these shares into citizens' hands, what have been the major roadblocks preventing this distribution?
Well, it's a little laughable that they've only trying to register the shareholders now.
Yeah.
It's been, what, 7-8 years since Erdnes Tavantolga was created, and
2011, I believe.
5-6 years since they first distributed shares to the public, and only now they're starting to register the shares. Well, for me, the reason why it's been taking this long is because, well, Erdnes Tavantolga took a lot of loans.
Yeah.
One from Chalco, several from the Development Bank of Mongolia, as well as some local commercial banks. So it was heavily indebted. And the reason why they took out all those loans was to be able to, that money was borrowed by Erdnes TT, and then that money was taken by the government to be distributed as cash handouts, part of the election promises. So they were trying to fulfill
Human Development Fund is where that money went, and then it was distributed.
Right. So all that money that was supposed to go into developing the mine, even potentially maybe even building a railway or a washing plant, all that went into giving cash handouts as part of the election promises.
And this is just after the mine launched, so it was really kicking the legs of the chairs out from under it.
Right. So so that's why they delayed the actual listing registration of shares, because the company was heavily indebted. If the people as shareholders stepped in with their rights, they would have seen how dirty and how that money was all misspent on. So now that the Erdnes TT is finally being able to pay off its debt, it supposedly only has about $50 million of debt left to Development Bank of Mongolia.
Okay.
And they said that they will pay back within a year.
So it's completely repaid to Chalco, correct?
It completely repaid the Chalco debt and then paid off $100 million out of the total $200 million to Development Bank, and then they just paid another $50 million apparently, and then there's only $50 million debt left. So
gotcha.
It's almost debt-free, if you can say that. So that's why now they're being able to finally get the actual shareholders back. The true,
but
the
still
2 million shareholders.
7 years of catch-up, hey?
Right. So my biggest concern, though, is 2 million shareholders, and they're roughly little less than 20% of the whole company. And my concern is, how will they be represented on the board? Will they be able to appoint independent directors who will look after the interests of 2 million people who are shareholders? So that's my biggest concern about the shareholders meeting. So that needs to be cleared up. Obviously it's going to be difficult to find who's going to be the one to represent 2 million people. So it'll be impossible to put 2 million people into one room and have a conduct a shareholders meeting. So that's impossible. So we need to find someone who can, several people actually, to be able to represent 2 million people on the board. So that's my biggest concern.
Someone that the public can trust as well.
Exactly, exactly.
So the other side of this is possibly listing abroad. You know, it's long been discussed that, well, yes, we'll list in Mongolia, but we're also looking at Hong Kong, and there was talk of even London some years ago.
Yeah.
How will distribution before the sale affect all of that?
Well, that needs to be done before the actual listing. So, you know, obviously you want to have your shareholder structure clear before you list on a foreign stock exchange. So these little administrative stuff, if you can say that.
So this is due diligence then?
Right. So this needs to happen before we can lodge application with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So that needs to be cleared up first. 2 million people needs to be registered locally, and then those people need to be able to perhaps even trade if they list on the stock exchange. So then these little things need to be cleared up quickly, and obviously if the government has the will, it can happen in a week. I mean, we've already know who those 2 million shareholders are. I mean, we had to know when we first distributed those shares, so we all know who those 2 million people are. So I don't know why it's going to take another several time to be able to re-register them again.
Meeting apparently.
So that needs to be done quickly if you want to be able to use the opportunity when the coal prices are sort of favorable at the moment.
You can definitely see why they're choosing this moment for sure.
Sure.
But
time is of the essence. Yeah.
I do recall when they initially gave the shares, people weren't able to trade it.
Right.
And there was concern that if people could trade it and they were putting a value on these shares, they could perhaps be undercutting the sale abroad.
Right.
So that could mean fewer returns as a negative?
Sure. Well, if we open the books, if you open trading at this moment, perhaps I have no doubt that a lot of people will try to sell it. So it might not be good for the share price, the valuation of it. So perhaps we can tie it together with the Hong Kong Stock
Mongolia,
Exchange.
of course, wants to get the highest share value at the initial because that's will go directly to the company in developing of its mines.
Right. So if we list in Hong Kong, obviously we'll probably issue more shares to raise some funds. So perhaps the ability to sell locally and listing in Hong Kong should be tied together, and that maybe happen simultaneously. Maybe.
Yeah. Now, we already touched upon that. There was a heavy debt burden. There were some management problems. Many of the CEOs have been arrested or investigated. How do you think investors are going to look at this mining investment?
Obviously, the biggest risk to any Mongolian state-owned company is the involvement of politics in the governance of a
But even privately
business.
owned companies deal with these issues.
Sure, but the mine itself, the deposit itself is a big mine.
Yes. That we can all agree on.
If investors believe in China buying coal from Mongolia, that's where the biggest attractiveness comes in.
So a big mine and a very hungry trading partner.
Right. And the risk is how involved, how the government will try to interfere with the management of a company who's listed on Hong Kong. So that's the biggest risk that the investors will have to look at. Okay.
Well, we're going to leave it at that. We're going to move on to another story that also involves coal. Ulaanbaatar is banning cheap and dirty coal in May, local authorities announced on Wednesday, as Mongolia continues to wage war on the choking air pollution that has so many residents up in arms. UNICEF predicts that the healthcare costs are set to skyrocket by a third if Mongolia fails to act against the air pollution, which is the cause of heart and lung conditions from long-term exposure. The ban does not include the combined heat and power plants located not far from the homes settled within the city. The government has struggled to deal with the air pollution after numerous campaigns and programs to stifle it. Ulaanbaatar's most vulnerable are the poorest families in the Gare districts, where homes are burning coal for warmth. Okay, so obviously people need to stay warm in Ulaanbaatar. It's the coldest capital city of the world.
Right.
How can the government possibly enforce this? Are they going door to door checking what's in your stove?
I'm a little concerned about the enforceability of this ban. But I commend the government for issuing this ban, which is I would say, a very brave and timely decision. Previous attempts to clean up the air didn't happen because there was not enough enforcement behind it.
Sure.
There was not enough continuous investment behind it. There were several years where we spent a lot of money convincing Gare District residents to buy clean stoves.
Subsidizing those
subsidizing
stoves.
them. But that policy needed to continue. The investment behind it needed to continue. But
Sure.
then, economic downturn happened. The government started cutting the budget. So that program died, and then there was no follow-up to it. Gare District's residents, they started selling their clean stoves
Oh,
or
really?
giving away.
Yeah.
And partly because we didn't have the clean coal
To work with it.
With the Genghis bond money, a lot of money was given to these clean coal factories. A lot of factories were set up.
But we don't see them today, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot of them were set up. They were opened, ribbons cut, but then those factories are not
They never
running
launched.
because no one's buying it because there's no clean
Oh,
stoves.
so did some of them launch and then they just
did.
didn't have very good sales?
Didn't
Was
have-
it a marketing issue?
Well, we had the clean stoves ready, and then the clean coal factories did not happen. And then obviously it was more expensive to buy them.
And of course, budgets were quite strained at the
Right.
time.
So, there was a policy mismatch there. So this time, it's only a little over a year, they're going to, in May 2009, they're going to ban it. But a lot of work needs to be done. The residents needs to be supplied with clean stoves again.
Yeah.
And then those factories, dead factories, need to be brought back again.
Those are
So a
no
lot of
small
things-
tasks.
These are not easy things that, it'll be hard to do it all in 1 year. But
Let alone a month.
the ban I think is a good first step. So
Sure.
banning it first and then trying to figure out what to do later is probably the best way to do it. If he waited for everybody to be ready for the ban, I think that would have never happened. So banning it, I think, was the first step, and then trying to figure out what to do, how to implement it I think is the right step. It might not happen in May 2019,
Yeah.
maybe get delayed, but it's what starts the process, I think.
It's interesting. This ban kind of reminds me to something in the UK where they have a licensing for TV. So you actually do have officers driving around in vans, checking on people if they've paid their license fee to have their TV. So, it is a very labor-intensive thing, but if the UB and the national authorities really put their weight behind it, it can be done. It'll take some work for sure, but it can be done.
And I think the ruling party, the incentive is there for them to actually make this happen because, right,
People are up in
2020,
arms.
right? So
there's consistently been protests.
and polls suggesting that MPP poll numbers are below DP right now.
Oh, really?
That
And you
means-
think that's because it has something to do with the air pollution situation?
True. Well, the economy, losing the presidential election,
Sure.
and it's what's affecting their ratings, I guess. But and also the ruling party, there's a stigma where the ruling party is always unpopular, right? So
Yeah.
they need to do something very dramatic to be able to have some chance of winning in 2020. So if you get air pollution down significantly, noticeably by 2020, maybe they will have a shot, at least in the city.
So the really important thing is, this ban will come in place, but there will still be some time, and there'll still be smoke in the air that people will have to deal with day to day. Do you have some suggestions, that you do for your family to protect them from the pollution? I know you have a newborn.
Yeah, well, the first thing I do is have the best air purifier I can buy in the local market and
Sure.
at home, and then I wear masks all the time. So, and in the meantime, that's what the UNICEF is also was suggesting, that the government needs to increase the public awareness of dangers of the air pollution, and have some kind of a global national campaign to convince people to start wearing masks. So that needs to happen very soon. And but the problem is it's hard for the public to be convinced of the dangers of it. I think the bigger population is not aware actually aware of how dangerous these air pollutions are. Yeah.
Also, of course, the most obvious thing is things like masks and purifiers have to be widely available. If you go into a lot of stores, it's hard to find. And I've long thought if the government's going to subsidize things, masks would be great. Make sure that the stores have them and then agree to buy them in the summertime for anything that wasn't sold off to customers at the end of the season. That would be such a very smart program, in my opinion. I'm no expert, of course, but I would like to see masks at stores.
And the problem is Mongolia currently does not have a standard mask that can fit little children.
Okay, yeah.
So you can find masks in pharmacies, but those are substandard. They don't meet any kind of international standards.
Yeah, if you see 3M on the mask, that usually means it's better quality. But I often don't see these in the pharmacies. I've seen them at some supermarkets. Won't name them, but even they don't carry them all the time.
And the problem is those masks we import from abroad only fit adults.
Yeah, and kids
and children,
have nothing,
they're the ones who are affected by the air pollution the most. And I was surprised by one statistic from the UNICEF report was that children living in the heart of the Gare districts have 40% less lung function than children living in the rural areas. Yeah. That's like having one lung instead of two lungs. So this is very, very, that's what's happening right now. I mean, children have, function in only one lung, if you can statistically. So,
and if that doesn't, make the point, I'll state this way. It really shows you that this is a socioeconomic issue. It's the poorest families living in the poorest neighborhoods where they burn the most coal just to stay warm that are most affected. So I really do hope that the government keeps that in mind.
Exactly.
Okay, we have one more story for you, and it also pertains to your health. You can get on it. Summer is just a few months away, and there's still some time to get into shape with a new campaign for Ulaanbaatar's gyms. They're organizing to make fitness more affordable. The Ulaanbaatar City Youth Development Agency and the Mongolian Bodybuilding Association are partnering to bring 10 to 50% discounts to UB residents at select fitness centers between the hours of 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. The discount program comes just as the Public Health Institute warned this week that much of Mongolian society is suffering from nutritional deficiencies. So, this is a little bit of getting out there and active, and also, people have to maybe clean up the way they eat. But, in Mongolia, it's quite obvious. You don't have to be here very long to know that sports are popular.
Right.
But how do people practice sports in the winter time where it's just much easier to stay home and watch the Netflix and eat your boats and hosher?
Well, fitness is becoming more accessible, more cheaper. It's becoming sort of a wave. So people are posting their shots of them in the gym.
Yeah,
so
there's some Instagram pros out there.
It's a trend. It's a trend on the social media. So and I think more young people do want to be more active. So, and the problem, of course, is fitnesses are still expensive. Even if the prices are coming down, it's still expensive to be able to enroll in a gym.
It's not really accessible to the average person, especially a low-income family.
Right. And then one other interesting development from a couple of weeks ago was that I believe starting from 2019, you'll be able to use your state health insurance to pay for a portion of your fitness money payment. So, guys, if you're a tax-paying adult, you can start using your health insurance to go to your nearest gym and get refunds.
That's great. Sounds great.
Right.
Okay, that's our show for the evening. We hope our briefings give you a leg up as you join the work week on Monday. Mogi, do you have any last thoughts for our audience?
Well, weather is warming up, so that's what I'm happy about. So stay warm.
Happy Soldiers Day and Women's Day to our audience. Those are coming up.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's our program for the evening. Good night, Ulaanbaatar.
Good night.